Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. This is part 3 in the Macintosh Classic repair series. If you haven't yet watched part 1 and 2, I recommend you do that first, because this is a continuation of those two parts. In the last part, we left off after I recapped the motherboard that Kale sent in. That was the stock motherboard for this machine. It wasn't quite working, so I had to fix it by adding a bodge wire so it would at least turn this computer on. But then I found the sound wasn't working, and also it was getting this weird disk drive error. So in this video, I'm going to try to figure out what's going on with those further faults. In addition, I'll take a look at the motherboard Tekokami sent in. That's the LC575 motherboard with the 68040 processor, also known as the Mystic upgrade for the Color Classic, and we'll try to get that motherboard working as well. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Okay, so first the sound issue. I've been trying to figure out what's going on. This is the sound chip right here according to the schematics, and I have double checked all of the traces, everything that goes in and out of this chip. I even reflowed all the connections to it, and no luck. This chip gets pretty warm when the computer boots up. This is the headphone jack, and there's no sound out of this. There's no sound out of the speaker on the computer itself, although if I put my ear right up to the speaker that's on the computer, I can hear a hiss while it's running. So there's definitely amplification happening there. It's just there's no audio getting to it. I also noticed when I had my phone right next to the computer and I was actually making a phone call, I could hear the LTE signal kind of buzzing through the speaker a little bit. So definitely amplification happening, but nothing coming out of this sound chip at all. There are 4 electrolytics right near this, so a lot of leaky electrolytic garbage went underneath this chip. And I'm wondering if there's something going on there. I've double checked that these new caps I put on are the correct orientation, that all of their contacts are good. So this is the other board, the one that came in this computer that had the battery leakage, and I've taken the sound chip off. And here it is right here. Now, unfortunately, this suffered a lot of damage too. Now, this was a huge mess, and I've done a lot of work to try to clean this up. And it looks better. And I did this just because I wanted to be able to see all the traces that were underneath this IC. Now, unfortunately, it's going to be hard to see, but a lot of these legs on the IC are really quite corroded. So I'm going to probably try to sand this down a little bit more with sandpaper. And then I think I'm going to try to remove this chip with hot air, and I'm going to put this one on instead. All right, I froze the video here so I could do a voiceover. So I didn't really get any footage or even pictures of me sanding down the chip that I took off the bad motherboard. But I did end up getting that successfully sanded down, so at least the pins look like I could solder them onto the new board. I was hoping that the corroded chip was not damaged, and moving it over to the new motherboard would actually restore the sound. All right, I swapped the sound chip. This is the old one here. This is the one off the original motherboard, the one with the battery leakage. Unfortunately, when I took this one off, I was very careful, but yet it lifted one of the traces. I guess that trace had just given up the ghost because of these leaky caps. So using the schematics, I ran this bodge wire underneath. It goes to a small capacitor to ground. Unfortunately, though, this chip is not working either. Now, the original chip, which is this one, before I took it off, I noticed that it got very hot when it was running. So that doesn't seem right because most of the chips on this board, even the processor, barely get warm. But this one, it got hot. And we had no sound. This chip, on the other hand, it doesn't get hot, but I still have no sound. Now, I had some amplified speakers plugged into here. This is the headphone output, or whatever, the sound output. And sometimes I can hear a little bit of noise, you know, like as you're working with the computer, you hear a little bit of background noise passing through when the volume is turned up loud. That might be normal. Also, when I push the volume control on the front of the computer, I hear a sort of a click coming through the sound here, and it stops when you get to the bottom or get to the top. Now, what's funny is it was running, and I started hearing just sort of weird random static coming out of the speakers, like just weird stuff. My phone wasn't anywhere near the computer, so it wasn't that. And when I went into the control panel and I fiddled with the sound and the volume, it didn't seem to change anything. So this chip was very, very corroded. I very carefully went through and checked continuity on every single pin to make sure that the pad to the top here had continuity. I also went through the schematics and I checked to make sure these Caps were good. I was getting the negative 5-volt rail over here because the sound needs the 5-volt rail. These two inductors are good. This diode is good. All the caps are good because those are new. I have the right continuity between all of these various pads. This chip talks to the ASIC, which is this chip here. I think that's how the sound data gets to it. That's good. I get continuity from this to this. So I think I'm at a dead end and I'm at a loss for fixing the sound on this board. I don't know what else to try. I don't have any more of these chips to try. I can't seem to find any problems at all on the board. And there we go. We just have no sound. The computer acts like everything is normal. It has no problems. It doesn't say there's no sound or microphone. Everything else, just the settings all work. From a functionality standpoint, this computer is working fine. It shows that it has 10 megabytes of RAM, which I think might be the maximum, although don't quote me on that. Performance of the entire machine feels, well, not so great. I ran some speedometer tests here and comparing it to a Mac Classic 2, it's roughly the same actually. I'd say this machine's a little bit faster, but it has 10 megs of RAM, which I think speeds up the overall machine. And I don't know about the Classic 2 that's stored in this database, but I remember the Classic 2 that I have, which also has 10 megs of RAM, runs faster than the one that's stored in here. So I think it gets the same speed boost that this thing does. This machine actually has enough video RAM for 16-bit color on this small resolution of the screen here. It's really, really slow though. So I currently have this thing running in 8-bit color mode. Here we are in the sound settings for the computer. And yep, just no sound at all on any of these volume levels. In fact, it's a little laggy. It could be because the sound chip's not working. In fact, the computer's sort of locked up right here. It doesn't usually lock up. Oh, there we go, it unlocked itself. So I wonder if it's trying to talk to the sound chip and it can't. If we look at the sound output, the sound chip in here supports 22 kilohertz 8-bit mono sound. That is correct. And if we go to volumes, on the volume settings here, it shows TV video, which is kind of funny. But when I was looking at the schematics, I noticed that the processor direct slot, the PDS slot, actually has a sound input pin on it. So I assume that there was a card that could go in here that added a TV tuner. And then you could actually have that come through here with the sound right through the internal speaker of the machine. But anyways, this is the volume control here. And yeah, the volume control, it just doesn't work. And what's interesting is the buttons on the front, they do work. See, it actually changes the volume. And if I push this all the way to the bottom, then you get the flashing menu bar, which is what it should do. So that works. The brightness control works fine. The CRT actually looks decent on this thing. I don't know if the sound input's working. There's a microphone here. If we go to sound in, it actually allows you to have the internal mic, external mic, or line in. I assume it's just showing us these options because it knows this thing is a Mac Classic 2 and not because the sound chip is actually working or not working. Just in case I hadn't mentioned it, I actually plugged my external speakers into the motherboard headphone jack. I did that before I even took the sound chip off the board after I had checked all the connections. That was with the original chip and it didn't work. No sound out of the speaker in here or off the motherboard. And the same goes for this replaced sound chip. Neither just generate any sound other than the odd, weird, staticky noises periodically. And if I do have this hooked up, I can hear a little bit of interference through the headphone jack when you're doing stuff on the computer. Like when you pull the menu down, you can just hear a little bit of changes in the hissing and stuff like that. Completely normal. I would expect that, to be honest. So the fact that there's just no sound is the unusual thing. I almost forgot to mention that error message that was popping up here about the disk being locked. It went away as soon as I reinstalled the internal floppy drive. So it seems that this motherboard does not appreciate having no floppy drive connected. It just thinks there's a disk in there all the time and it keeps trying to format it, which it can't do. Soft power off and power up, is that definitely working? If I go to shutdown there, the computer just turns itself off. One thing about this motherboard, and I had mentioned this early on in the video, was that a viewer had written to me and said that you had to have the battery installed for the motherboard to turn on. And I really don't think that's the case, but I want to actually test that. So there we go, I just took the battery out. And the reason why I say that this should work fine without the battery is because when you put the battery in, it goes to this little IC here, the power. And then it goes to this IC, which is what controls the power on and off. And both of these chips get powered up directly from the computer's 5-volt always-on power. So when you slide this into the chassis and you turn on that power switch, these chips suddenly get powered up, even without this battery in place. Now, if this battery is here and you pull this out or you turn off the power switch, absolutely the clock and the CMOS or the PRAM battery, it maintains the settings for the computer. But as soon as you put that thing in and you turn it on, it overrides the battery and the battery is no longer used. So with no battery in there, when I put this thing back in, it should just power up these chips, and then the power on button on the keyboard should turn this on as normal. So let me try that. All right, so the motherboard is in, the battery's out, it's just sitting right here on the desk, and let's see what happens when I push the power button. Yeah, it turned on as normal. So I think what was happening for that particular viewer who does Mac repairs is that there was actually some damage on that part of the board. And I bet you that 5-volt always-on signal was not getting to those chips. And because of that, it would just permanently drain this battery. I think everything would work okay if that were the case. It's just that it would rely on the battery all the time to run those chips. And I would imagine that this battery, especially, you know, this 2032 I have here, won't last very long if that is all that's running those chips indefinitely. I know that it's not unheard of that you have to have a valid battery in some computers to get them to turn on. I even had an Intel motherboard, I don't know what era, like from the late 90s, and it needed a battery, otherwise it wouldn't turn on. It was an ATX motherboard. But it's not really good design practice, to be honest, because you might want to remove a battery to prevent leakage and just leave it out indefinitely, and you want to still be able to use the computer. So it seems kind of a bad design to require a battery. And indeed, Apple did not require a battery in this machine, at least, for it to work. So if you have one of these, you could take that battery out and you can still use the computer whenever you want. You're just going to lose the settings for the brightness and the volume and things like that. But it's no big deal. You can just set those when you do use the computer, and then you can store it away and not worry about finding a leaky mess inside when you go to use it years down the road. So yeah, I think this motherboard has definitely kicked my butt. I spent a lot of time trying to troubleshoot the sound circuitry here. I know it seemed quick in the video, but hours and hours and hours of trying to figure this out, not to mention swapping these chips around and getting this chip cleaned up so it would fit on the board, all that stuff. I am pretty disappointed that I couldn't get this thing working, especially after the amount of time I put into it, but such is life sometimes, right? And at least it is working for the most part. I got it turning on at least, and it is booting and it's stable. I let this run for hours and there's no crashing or anything. So everything except for the sound is working great with this motherboard. And it's nice to know that this Mac Color Classic is working, like at least the chassis and stuff. I still don't know for sure if the sound is working on here, like the amplifier that is on the analog board, but I presume that that's probably working fine and all the issues do lie with this motherboard. So I am gonna bag this motherboard up and it is time to move on to that 68040 Mystic motherboard. It's not a Mystic motherboard, it's from another Mac, like an LC575, I think. Here it is, but this will give this machine the speed boost that it deserves. And let's just hope that this thing works. Oh, look, the same sound chip is right here on this one, and it's got 4 capacitors right by it, so they leak their gross juice all over it. Ugh. All right, well, by this point, everyone knows the drill. Got my little needle nose pliers here to pull these caps off. I will pull the little legs off. I will then clean off the bad solder, and then I will give this board a thorough washing to get all this dust and whatever capacitor juice is left behind on here. And then I will reinstall new capacitors, clean up any flux that's from that, and then I think this board will be ready for testing. So it's going to be a jump cut this time. And I'm done. That was a recap job that was pretty much textbook. No issues whatsoever. All the caps came off without problems. No rip traces. Actually, very, very minimal corrosion. There's really pretty much no bad effects on this board at all. The caps were definitely leaking. I could see leakage under there. But as you see, the board is super clean now. Fresh caps are on everywhere, and it looks great. So the first thing I need to sort out on this board is the RAM situation. Now there are 3 sockets here. This one here is 72-pin memory. This is the main system memory. And then these 2 here are video RAM. And this particular system requires both of these be populated for the video to work at all. When Tekokami got this board, I guess from Computer Reset, it didn't have any memory, but luckily I have lots of RAM. Now for the video RAM, I actually don't have a ton of that. And I just happen to have exactly 2 memory sticks. See, I wrote Mac VRAM on here. And these were inside of, oh, it's like a Mac Quadra 610 or a Centra 610, something like that. It was a computer I got at some point, and the caps had leaked so badly on it that it actually had completely ruined the machine. It had massive corrosion around chips like the CPU and the ASICs that were on it. And I looked at that and I saw so many traces that were bad. I actually didn't even bother trying to repair that machine. I just salvaged parts off of it and I got rid of it. Luckily, the machine was just like $10, I think. So I got a disk drive and the CPU and some RAM and stuff off of it. So no big loss there. But the video RAM is now going to be installed in here. Hopefully it works. And then for system memory, I happen to have a bag here. It might be hard to read, but it says 32 megabytes. And I have a stick of 32 meg RAM here. And I know this machine supports up to, I think, 128, I read. And there is some onboard memory here. Maybe it's 8 megabytes, something like that, or 4 megabytes. But finding 128 meg single sticks of memory, I think 32 is the largest I have. And anyways, to be honest, 32 megabytes plus the 4, so what, 36 megs? It's honestly more memory than I could possibly need on a machine like this. I'm not going to be running massive programs, and I'm going to be sticking to OS 7.xx. I don't want to run OS 8 on here, which could use more RAM. So the RAM is populated. This is a Mitsubishi stick. So cool. Before I can actually use this motherboard directly in the Color Classic, there's actually a mod I have to do. And you have 2 ways to go about it. One is I can mod the Color Classic itself, the analog board that's in there, to support 640 by 480. And the other thing is, or the other choice that is I think there's a couple resistors or one resistor I can swap on this board, and that will make this board operate at the 512 by 384 resolution, the native resolution of the Color Classic. And believe it or not, I think I'm actually going to do the resistor swap on this board just so I can keep the Color Classic stock without changing the resolution. Because I kind of like that it's the same resolution as the original Mac 128. It's just color. There is a website called powercc.org. It has all the information you could ever want on the Color Classic and upgrades and how to mod it and whatnot. And look at this site. It says I need to first remove a 0 ohm resistor at R116. Then I need to solder a 4.7K onto R109. And then check R110, and if there's a resistor there, I need to take it off. All right, so there are the resistors. So R110, it says to remove. There isn't one there. That red blob is just a piece of glue. 109, there's nothing there. And then 116 is that one down there. That's the 0 ohm. I need to take that off, and I need to salvage a 4.7 off something else and stick it on the R109 spot. So I'm going to use the bad motherboard, and I'm going to steal a resistor off the bottom here. All right, R40 is a 472, so that's exactly what I want. Oh, these are glued down, so these are hard to get off. Gotta kind of flick it off. That broke. Oh no, that worked. It didn't break. There were little blobs of glue between the pads where I needed to install the new resistor. And that's because when this board was assembled, they placed the resistors and the capacitors on the bottom of the board so they don't fall off when it goes into the wave soldering. Well, that glue is very hard now, so I had to scrape it away to be able to reinstall the new 4.7K resistor. I guess I'm now ready to try this. I have the video RAM in, processor's in again, new caps, resistors are fixed, and I have some memory on here. It does have onboard RAM, so if it doesn't start up, I can try taking this RAM off. It might not be compatible. All right, here we go. Well, we don't have any sound, so that's not a good sign. And in fact, CRT is not running correctly. Oh wait, I just heard it turn on. Hey, look at that. All right. No sound though. So is the problem with the lack of sound something to do with the Macintosh, with this chassis, like maybe the power supply or something? That's definitely brighter than the other one. All right, I'm turning this off. I'll plug the zip drive in. I'm going to plug the external speakers in to the computer. So in case there's sound, we'll hear it out of those. Power. Hey, okay, Did you hear that? Sound out of the external speakers. So I'm wondering, the amplifier inside this thing must not be working, but like I said before, I did test the external speakers on both sound chips on the original Color Classic motherboard, and it didn't work. I didn't have sound, but the fact that there's sound here, but we had no beep out of this thing. And yes, by the way, the speaker is actually connected. I can just see that right there, but all right, so let's boot this thing up. So how exciting this thing is working. And right away, wow, I feel the speed increase. It's dramatic, the way the menus are so snappy. Oh, just the scroll, oops. I mean, it's really, what a speed increase. So let's go to sound. I booted off the zip drive here, by the way. Let's see here. So I think the one difference is this thing does support stereo sound. Now it's still 8-bit, but at least it's stereo. That's compared to mono on the last one. Okay, you can control that there separately. That's basically the alert volume is separate from the master volume. So I'm going to disconnect the amplified speakers from the back of the machine. Let's see if we have internal sound now. Hey, we do. So I'm not totally sure why there was no sound when I first turned this machine on, but it could have been that the headphone jack, it has a switch inside. So when you plug something into it, the sound is routed through the jack as opposed to the internal speaker. Maybe it was stuck, and sticking a connector in there, the 3.5mm connector, kind of freed up that switch. So when I pulled it out, it's now routing through the speaker. But clearly we have sound, and let's do a quick reboot. We should hear the nice startup chime. Yeah, there we go. It's definitely working. Zip drive ejected. I got to push that back in. Eagle-eyed among you may notice my zip drive looks a little different. I'm actually filming this a few days after that last segment. And yes, what happened is I bought a USB zip drive. It was the same form factor, but it has this sort of translucent case, but it was in perfect mint condition, except the drive was dead. In fact, when you powered it up, you just got two solid lights and a flashing error light inside the drive, and it was absolutely dead. So I took apart that drive and my SCSI drive, and I transferred my SCSI drive guts into this. So this is now a translucent, clear SCSI drive. I love it. All right, the system is booted. So let's see how much RAM we have right now. Remember I stuck that 32 meg sim in there? And yeah, look, 36 megs. Ah, that's awesome. So I thought I read somewhere that finding memory that works in this machine isn't super easy. It has to be some specific type, but I guess whatever random piece I stuck in there was the right piece. Oh, I see the system is using 31 megabytes, and that is a symptom of it not being set to 32-bit addressing. So we go to the control panel and we go to memory and 32-bit addressing. And it looks like I can turn a cache on. I think these settings are not retained across reboots though, when you have no battery installed. Like I have no battery in this thing. So changing those won't really do a whole lot, because next time I power this machine off and back on, it will lose those settings again. So let me run speedometer here and check out how fast this computer is compared to the Color Classic, which I ran this on as well, which the Color Classic was no faster than the regular Classic 2. So cool, 68040. Now this does not have an FPU because it has the lower cost processor chip minus the FPU. I'm going to quickly run some tests. I'm going to turn off the disk test though, because there's no point doing a performance test on the zip drive. Oh, I can tell right away that this is so much faster, the way those graphics were running there. Whoa. And here are the results. Here's the Color Classic with the motherboard that was sent in by Kale. This is with 10 megs of RAM. And then this on the left is this new motherboard by Tekokami. The numbers that are represented here, I think, is a relative performance number versus a Mac Quadra 905. I'm not too sure of the specs of that machine, but being a Quadra, it was probably relatively fast, but maybe it was a 68040 at 25 megahertz. But the size of these graphs is a good way to compare the speed of the previous machine to this machine. And as you can see, we're talking multiple times faster. So for instance, the graphics test, this machine got a 0.21 on the original motherboard, and now it's getting a 1.27. What is that, like 6 times faster? In fact, most of these results are 5 to 6 times faster than they were with the original motherboard. The original motherboard in this machine just felt so sluggish, and this one, oh, it feels so nice to use. All right, well, it's time to turn this machine off and start putting it together properly. So with this motherboard, this machine is starting to be awesome. But one of the problems with this particular machine, of course, is it doesn't have a hard drive. It didn't have one when I got it. It was already taken out. So here is a 500 megabyte good hard drive. I'm gonna stick this in here because I think this should be a good fit for this particular machine. The processor on here is 33 megahertz, but it does not have a math coprocessor in it. So I just happen to have another 68040 here. Here it is. And this is the RC version as opposed to the EC version. And the RC version, this has the math coprocessor. I also have a heatsink to go on there. I'm curious if there's a way to overclock this motherboard, maybe to 40 megahertz. I looked around for a crystal oscillator and I didn't see anything. If anyone knows how to make this thing run at 40 megahertz, so probably an 80 megahertz clock, let me know. And the final thing is this right here. This is an Ethernet card, and it's originally for a Mac LC. Now, even though this PDS slot has this extra part here that the LC doesn't have, the LC is just this section, this card, which is designed for the LC, should still fully function on this motherboard, and it would connect up like that, leaving that extra little part unused. And I assume this, what looks like a PCI slot, is not a PCI slot, some other kind of expansion connector that's a lot faster than this, although I don't really understand that because Processor Direct is like Visa Local Bus. It just talks directly to the CPU at full CPU speed, I think, right? 33 megahertz. So that should be as fast as possible. Anyhow, this should give the computer network ability, which will be very useful. And then the last problem is that the back of the computer has this cover that covers up the back and it has the holes for the ports and stuff. Well, as you may notice here, it does not line up anymore. So I can't put this cover on with this motherboard in this case. Well, luckily with the back cover, the community has come through again because someone has come up with an STL file you can print that will match up to the ports on this motherboard, but have this shape here that goes in the back of the Classic. And again, I found this information on powercc.org. They linked to the STL file, and sure enough, I fired up the printer and I printed it up, and here is the replacement back panel. Now, my filament that I use lately is black, so there it is. But I gave this several coats of this beige spray paint that I have that's relatively close. Obviously, it's not a perfect match for the back of the computer. And then I hit it with some semi-gloss enamel so that this is protected and it should not scratch off when I go to connect cables up and stuff. And this punch out here would be for the network card here. It should line up there once this is on the motherboard, so I'm gonna have to break that out, which will cause me to cringe a little bit because once that's out, there is no way to put that back on. So I will be testing this network card first before I break that panel out, just in case this card's not working or I can't find working drivers or whatever. And now to start the assembly process. Time to switch that 68040 processor. I don't have the right chip removal tool, so a little flat blade screwdriver, and you just slowly work your way around the socket, lifting the chip out. And then to reinstall the new one, it's simply just popping it in and giving it a firm push. You might want to put some Deoxit first on the board if you want to make sure it has good contacts, although the gold contacts on those pins are very good. I'm applying some thermal tape, which I bought from AliExpress quite a while ago, and this is to hold on the heatsink. The original processor that this came out of, another computer, it had a way to retain a heatsink with clips, but the socket on this motherboard does not have that capability. Next, you just peel the backing off the tape, and once you have that ready, you just push the heatsink onto the tape, and it usually sticks really well. I've never had any issues with these heatsinks falling off after I've used this tape. Oh, I almost forgot to talk about the battery on this motherboard. So this thing right here is a little piece of like Velcro hook and loop kind of a thing to hold a battery on, and the battery connects right there to those pins. This is the type of battery that this thing uses. It's a 4.5 volt alkaline cell, and of course alkalines, yeah, they leak, but there it's got a little bit of the fuzzy Velcro on the bottom, and it connects like this to the motherboard. Let's take a look if this battery even works at all. I'm sure this thing is dead. I don't even know, it was in my box of junk. So let's just take a quick look. I mean, I'm happy I have this because at least it's got the connector, yeah, 0.041 volts. That is dead as a doornail. And then it's got 3 pins with 1 pin missing, and the connector has 1 pin blocked out, so you can't plug it in the wrong way. That's the way it connects. So the positive or the red wire is on the left side if you're looking at the motherboard with the big connector, the white connector towards you. So reassembly time. First thing I have to do is pull the hard drive mounting bracket thing out of the computer. It goes onto the bottom of the hard drive so it slots into the case. Pretty standard stuff, just install the 4 screws through the mounting bracket and into the hard drive. Now when you look at Apple's service manual, it wants you to take out the analog board to do any service like installing the hard drive or floppy drive. You are supposed to disconnect all the cables going to the CRT to do this. I'm going to be a little bit lazy and just sort of slide that analog board out with everything still connected except for the neck board. That way I don't have to go and discharge the CRT. I'm holding the CRT board off to the side so I can see what I'm doing, but you just sort of slot the hard drive in and it clicks into place. And it's all a bit fiddly with one hand, but you have to connect the 50-pin ribbon cable and the power cable to the hard drive, of course, while holding the analog board off to the side. Because I have other serviced 1.44 megabyte Macintosh floppy drives, I'm actually taking the original one out of this machine so I can swap it for one that is serviced. The speaker goes back into the computer. It's actually just held on by 2 little hook and loop strips, and it fires the sound out the side of the machine. It seems a little weird the way they did this, but that's the way it was when I opened this machine up. There's a cable that comes off the analog board, and that's what the speaker plugs into, so you just have to slide those into each other. Now all the peripherals are installed. I'm just putting the analog board back into the machine, reconnecting the degaussing wire, and then reconnecting the neck board. And it's now time to slide this board back into the machine. I have the network card installed, and I also reconnected the wire that would go to the battery pack, but I have cut away that dead battery pack, and I will hook up a CR2032 to that wire later. The power cord is reconnected. Does the machine work? We have a green power LED. Let's see what happens. Come on. There's always a little bit of a wait here before the CRT initializes. And that's just the way that this motherboard is in this particular chassis, at least. See, in this long wait, you might almost think that there is a problem, right? But no, you just keep waiting, and I'm going to keep talking. And eventually, it will work. Maybe. Maybe not. Oh, look, there it is. See, if I talked long enough, it actually worked. And all looks good. It's booting off that hard drive I installed. Well, the computer is working with that processor with the FPU in it. It's booting off the hard drive. Floppy drive is working as well. I put a disk in there, it ejects it fine. But the sound is not working again. Well, it does work with the external speakers, which I have connected. We got the beeping happening out of there, but if I pull this out, no sound. So now I'm left with the problem not knowing whether the problem exists on the analog board or the problem exists on the digital board. Where is this issue with the sound not getting routed through the speaker? Is the amplifier chip on the analog board the problem, or is it the digital board? And I don't have another board to test with, so I can't even swap a known good board into here and see if the sound problem exists the same way as this, or if it works. That will right away tell me if it's which board it is. And of course, because of the design of this computer, you can't even test things outside of the computer. It has to be all together like this. Very frustrating. Well, unfortunately, you're gonna have to wait until part 4 to see the solution to the sound problem on this Mystic upgraded Color Classic. But don't worry, I do solve the sound problem, unlike the sound chip problem on that first board with the 68030 on it. Anyhow, if you enjoyed this video or this series so far, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. But if you didn't, you know what to do. And of course, hit that subscribe button to subscribe to my channel with that bell icon for notifications when I upload new videos. It's definitely helpful to my channel when you do so. And then of course, put your comments and your suggestions down in the comment section below. And that's gonna be it. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.